Good morning, and it's so good to be here and see all of you here. We are really pleased with the turnout, and we are even more pleased that we are releasing a very important guideline for women, for families, for the people that care or support women and families. We are releasing the second edition of a best practice guideline that aims to reduce the prevalence of perinatal depression, and if not the prevalence, at least how we deal with it, how do we support women that have perinatal depression, pre or postpartum. It is a very serious health condition that most women keep it quiet. Women in this room keep it quiet. A condition that as women we are used to be told, pull up your socks and just keep going. That happens to everybody, right? But as nurses, we know that that's not the case. And there are two and more, I learn now, people in this room that had experiences with perinatal depression, and they will be speaking today, and I will thank them each in time. I want to put this, though, in the context also of the BPG program in general, a program that a minister back then, Minister Whitmer, when she got my proposal, believed that can be done. A program that the government funded since then, 1997. A program that has helped not thousands, but hundreds of thousands of people, both in Ontario, in Canada, and abroad. A program that is implemented, and I'm recognizing here Heather McConnell, the Associate Director for Implementation and Knowledge Transfer, that has been implemented in 700 organizations formally through formal agreements with RNAO. So a program that, because of that, needs to deliver quality evidence and quality deliverables, and that people can trust. So this is the reason why this is the second edition, because we don't satisfy ourselves at RNAO simply by doing a guideline and then putting it in a shelf and then expecting that everybody will use it. But we actually ensure that those guidelines are every 4 to 5 years reviewed, updated, and Megan must be somewhere here. She leads the development of guidelines with the team that will specifically speak on this guideline today. But it's a program that people can rely on. They can rely on the basis of being solid evidence put out to the public, both to health professionals, including nurses, and to the public at large. And it is a program that has a solid implementation program attached that helps people actually not only to have the book in the library or in the shelves, but actually to put it to use for the people primarily of this province, but now it has really reached the world at large. It's in 15 countries in 5 continents. And I just, as the founder of the program, feel extremely proud and also thankful to the government, past, present, and future, for supporting the program, because it has delivered in spades for the people of this province and others. With that, I am extremely delighted to introduce the staff that led the development of this guideline in particular here at RNAO. She is a research methodologist and an implementation scientist. And I am introducing Katherine Wallis to come and share a bit specifically about the guideline, and we will take it then from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Doris, and good morning. Delighted to have so many of you here today. My name, as you hear it, is Katherine Wallis, and my background is in obstetrics. And today I'll tell you that I feel like a proud mom as we release this new guideline, Assessment and Interventions for Perinatal Depression. As the guideline lead, I'd like to share just a little bit about the guideline and highlight some of the recommendations that we felt were especially important. Doris has alluded to the importance of perinatal depression. It is a serious mental illness It is one of the most common mood disorders, and it's the most frequent underdiagnosed complication of pregnancy, which means we are letting women down when we don't determine their depression and we don't support them as far as care. All of our guidelines begin with a purpose and scope, as did this one. And the purpose and scope really lays out what is the goal of the guideline, who are the intended users of that guideline, and recipients of care. For this guideline, we wanted to enhance quality practice for practitioners, for nurses and members of the interprofessional team, as it related to perinatal depression care components. And those we described as 5 different components, beginning with screening. We felt screening was essential because it identified those at increased risk. Secondly, we wanted to assess those symptoms in order then to determine who has a true perinatal depression. We wanted to be aware of what were the interventions or treatments that could help to reduce symptoms and support someone to recovery, to evaluate and monitor their response to treatment, and then also include prevention strategies for those with identified risk factors or early symptoms. The scope of our guideline is expanded from the 2005 edition. That one focused solely on postpartum depression, or depression occurring after a pregnancy. This one also includes depression occurring during pregnancy as well, and it reflects an expansion of the body of knowledge since 2005, since our first edition, and it was important to us then to include that component so that we could have then the best outcomes through evidence. The guideline uses 3 guiding frameworks that we felt were important. First was a person-centered approach that recognizes individuals and their holistic needs. Second, that it informs informed decision-making, that respects, regards, and promotes autonomous decision-making. And third, recognition for social determinants of health, or social determinants of mental health, more importantly. This recognizes the disproportionate increased risk of perinatal depression for those who live with inequities, components like poverty, or persons who live with intimate partner violence. In addition, the need for nurses and other members of the interprofessional team to advocate to eliminate these modifiable factors. The research indicated to us what signs and symptoms are of perinatal depression, and our speakers today are going to let you know of their experiences. But in the evidence, we heard of persons who experience feelings of sadness, of depression, of self-doubt, of worry, of feelings of shame, and of stigma. Because, as Doris alluded to, there's a cultural expectation that when we become parents, that we're filled with joy and fulfillment, and the experience of depression really counters that. There are fortunately strategies that are effective for perinatal depression care, and I'm going to highlight 3 of them in the guideline. So first, the recommendation to routinely screen those at risk for perinatal depression during both pregnancy and postpartum. This strategy then increases then the opportunity to identify those at risk and provides a mechanism for early detection and early assessment and treatment where indicated. Important because then we can significantly decrease their perinatal depression symptoms. And we know that if we use screening tools, as opposed to just relying on clinical judgment, will increase the odds of finding those at increased risk. As part of screening also is identification of those at risk for self-harm or suicide. And this is very important because we know that suicide is the leading cause of maternal death during the perinatal year. We cannot let women die for this reason. We must intervene. Our second priority recommendation is to provide or facilitate access to professionally led psychological supports. So professionally led by nurses or members of the interprofessional team, and psychological supports are those talk therapies. These are seen as first-line therapies for persons with perinatal depression, and they're the preferred therapies for those who are experiencing those depressions. We know that these can be effectively provided by nurses, members of the interprofessional team, in a number of different formats, including in person, via groups, individually, as well as online. Our last priority recommendation is in the area of organization and system policy recommendations. This is when we ask, what do we need from a healthcare organization or the broader healthcare sector in order to support best practices? This recommendation supports the implementation of comprehensive and coordinated mental health services. We need services that are accessible. We need services that are accessible so that there are not delays in accessing care, and care approaches that are not sporadic or inconsistent. My hope is that you will read not only about these 3 recommendations, but the other 13 that make up this guideline. I wanted also, in closing, just to take a moment to say thanks to the many, many individuals that are involved in the development of this guideline, beginning with our expert panel and co-chairs, Dr. Angela Bowen and Dr. Phyllis Montgomery. Both are PhD-prepared nurses who assume the role of co-chairs. They're both educators at schools of nursing, researchers, and strong advocates for perinatal depression care. So we thank them for their leadership. We also thank all of the 11 expert panel members. They were nurses and members of the interprofessional team, including a registered nurse, a registered midwife, and a psychiatrist. I also want to acknowledge that many of the members of our expert panel also participated in the guideline back in 2005, and we appreciate especially their dedication to RNAO and to the guideline. So a special thanks to Phyllis Montgomery, to Barb Bowles, to Marilyn Evans, Denise Hebert, Karen McQueen, and Sue Bookie Bassett, who joins us today. Also thanks to our stakeholder reviewers who provided feedback on this guideline. They included those who have lived experience, and it was important to have that voice and perspective included in our guideline. Stakeholder reviewers also provided feedback on evaluation measures, and this helps organizations to implement best practices, including our best practice spotlight organizations. I also would like to thank my colleagues of the research and development team, some of whom are here today. So our senior manager, Megan Bamford, guideline development methodologist, Grishma Jacob, and project coordinators, Ifra Ali, who started this journey with me, and Glennis Gittins, who helped me to get to the finish line. I also would like to recognize a former colleague, Laura Legier. She was the senior nursing research associate, and Laura was also the lead author for a published manuscript for this guideline. In closing, as the guideline development lead, as both a registered nurse and previously a registered midwife, I've had the pleasure of taking care of many, many families during the course of pregnancy, labor, birth, and postpartum. And I've seen firsthand the disabling effects that perinatal depression can have on these individuals. And I know firsthand the importance of having the knowledge and skill, the competencies, in order to effectively provide care. I believe by implementing this new best practice guideline, we can change the trajectory of persons with perinatal depression. Thanks.
So it gives me a great pleasure, first of all, to thank you, Katherine, for absolutely your stellar work, the expertise, the passion, the engagement, and the capacity to lead this panel with the co-chairs to deliver this guideline for people. And it gives me particular pleasure to introduce to you now a past staff of RNAO, a colleague, and a woman that I admire for the courage to speak, and also a person that just finished a PhD, and I want to congratulate. So first, let me do that. Congratulate Sue Bookie Bassett for finishing the PhD. And this is the book that actually shares about this amazing program for the past 20 years. And Sue, when we were talking about her coming today, said to me, would I be able to buy the book at RNAO? And I said, no, you're not going to be able to buy the book at RNAO because we don't sell the book, but you're going to get it.
Excellent.
So
Thank
Sue,
you
that's
so
for the
much.
PhD.
Thank you very
And
much.
the
Forward to reading it.
reason, there is a test at the end of the week. The reason that I really wanted Sue to speak today is both for her lived experience, but I know many women with the lived experience. So it was really because actually Sue is the one that triggered when she was staff at RNAO that we do this guideline. Sue had kept it quiet, and we really didn't even know what she was going through. And then Sue, when she came back from mat leave, met with me, shared with me, and they said, do you think we could do a guideline on this? And the rest, of course, is history. So for what you went through, for the marvelous kids you have now, I said I was so afraid when she was pregnant with the second because by then I knew. So, and she went through very beautifully. And also for the for the smartness to come and say that we do a guideline on this. So for all of the above, thank you for being here today. I know it's not easy, and we leave it with you now. Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you, Doris. Thank you. Oh, there we go. So, thanks everyone for the invite today. And I am going to share with you a little bit about my personal story, but I also want to just preface this by saying that I knew I had done a speech before about my experience at a conference in 2003, so I went home and I actually found it. So I'm going to actually pull some of what I said at that particular conference, which was a women's health conference at the time. So I'll share a little bit with you about my story and my experience with postpartum depression. And some of you in the room would have known me at that time and as I was living through it. So this talk describes my experience as a patient as opposed to an experienced obstetrical nurse who I was at the time that I went through this. So in 1999, November, after a 41-week pregnancy, I gave birth to a beautiful baby daughter, and my husband and I were very happy to have such a lovely baby girl. Hilda Swirsky was there. The labor and delivery process was pretty good. I stayed in the hospital for 3 nights, and then I went home on a Monday afternoon. So far, I thought everything was going pretty well, and I thought everything was under control. We're going to go home. We're going to bring our baby home in the car seat, and life will be good. So the first night home was fine. Second night home, not so fine. Elizabeth I guess she was really hungry, and she was crying a lot, and poor mom wasn't able to settle her down. So just like many other moms, I felt really anxious about why couldn't I settle her down, even though I knew my nurse brain was telling me, it's okay, this is normal, but my patient self was saying, this is causing me a lot of stress. So eventually we ended up staying up the whole night. We went to the Oakville Hospital at the time. One of the nurses there promptly fed her some formula by cup feed. She had a great big burp and she fell asleep, and she was asleep for hours. So then that made me feel like I wasn't a very competent mom at the time, because I thought, why can't I care for my baby? I'm an obstetrical nurse. I know what to look for. So for me, that was really, quite stressful in terms of feeling like this is my baby and I can't even look after her. So by the 5th and 6th postpartum day, I started to feel really down. Especially in the evenings, I felt sad and lonely during some of the days, and I remember saying to myself that this is not fun. This surprised me, and I remember going for a walk with my daughter on a sunny day in December with her in the carriage, and I was crying the whole time thinking, I should be happy. Why am I feeling this way? And then after about 3 to 4 weeks, I was still feeling this way, and so I received a call from a public health nurse at the time who phoned to see how I was doing. And I told her, I said, I don't think this is just the blues. I think this is something more. So she came right away that day. She was amazing. She was wonderful and very, very supportive. She came to see me a number of times. But one of the challenges when I was going through this was it was right before the Christmas season. And there were a lot of people who were starting to take their time off for the Christmas break. So I was trying to do things like sleep to take care of myself while my daughter was sleeping, but my mind was racing. I still felt anxious, and I remembered caring for patients who'd had postpartum psychosis, and I kept thinking that's going to happen to me, or I'm going to be one of those people that is on the verge of suicide, and that was terrifying to me. So I was not happy, and I had to keep reaching out for support. So all of this was happening at a later point in the day, and I was trying to be the nurse for myself and think about what I should do. Where could I go for help? I called the public health nurse and told her how I was feeling, and she said she would visit me again the next day. She told me to call my family doctor, which I did. And however, they were closed for the day, and I couldn't go there until the next day. So then I ended up calling a friend to come and stay with me because I was just just constantly feeling really anxious, and I just didn't want to be alone. So the next day I went to the family doctor. Immediately they gave me an antidepressant, and I don't think I received any other information in terms of any other type of support that would be available for me in my community. So that was on the Friday. The weekend came and went, and the Monday I went back because I still wasn't feeling well, and I think I was just really scared about things. So after a few weeks, I started to feel better. public health nurse gave me some resources about what was available in the community, and I started to go to some of the new mom support groups, exercise class, etc. And by about 2-3 months postpartum, I was feeling a lot better. And during about 2 months, I guess, I ended up being seen by a social worker, and they actually did the screening, the Edinburgh scale, at that point in time. But by that time, I was already feeling better. So one of the things that my message at the time to people was that it was difficult for me, having been a nurse, knowing what I should be doing if I was a nurse for a patient. But here I was the patient, and it was December, and not a lot of resources were around or available at the time. So I wanted to make sure that, nurses are aware of, and other professionals are aware of the issue, but also how we can support people and where people need support so that they don't fall through the cracks. We didn't have a lot of family around at the time either. Both of our sets of parents didn't live nearby, and we didn't have any sisters or brothers either. So it was a bit of a tough experience, and it was a bit shocking to me because, as I said before, I was like a nurse. I should know what to do, right? So it was very distressing. So then, anyways, things went along fine after that. I enjoyed my pregnancy. My daughter's fine. We had a great time together while I was on my mat leave, came back to work. Second pregnancy. Next phase of the postpartum depression. So I was worried, obviously, that this might happen again. However, it didn't. But I did a lot of things differently that time to make sure that I took care of myself. So I asked for support before he was born, and my son this time. And I had someone come and my mom and my mother-in-law come and stay with me for a little bit at the first couple of weeks. I kept my daughter in her daycare at the time to maintain her social routine and gave me more time with my son. I rested more when he rested, and I didn't even mind the night feedings at 2 a.m, which with Elizabeth that was very stressful, but with him it was actually quite pleasant. So, and the one thing that happened with the second pregnancy was, what I was disappointed about was I was in the hospital, and it did say on my chart that I'd had a history with my first child. However, not one nurse in the hospital spoke to me about this and whether I had support on the way home. Not one. So I wrote back after that experience to say this is not good. Anyways, I knew what I needed at that time, and I put the supports in place for myself, and luckily I didn't go through that same experience again. But I think it's really important that we do have the guidelines, such as the one that's being released now, that includes all the different components that Katherine has mentioned. The screening, it's so critical. The asking people about what supports they have, and to not make assumptions that because people are healthcare professionals, they're not going to experience these things, because it can affect anybody. And so I would just say that as nurses and other healthcare professionals, we need to continue to create awareness of this particular condition throughout the pregnancy, and to reassure new families that what they're experiencing may not be that unusual. And I think by continuing to talk about it, we'll continue to raise that awareness and improve the care of the patients and families that we can, who are across the sector. So thank you very much.
So thank you, Sue, for the courage to share the experience, and thank you for triggering RNAO to develop this guideline. And I now want to introduce a member of our own board of directors, Lamo Dolkar, who was so generous. I thought that's the only thing I could think at the beginning, in addition to reaching out to you and being with you. I just thought how generous of any person, when he's going through such a difficult experience that affects you so personally, to be so generous to share it publicly. And Lamo did in a feature that our communications department developed that is called Nursing Station. That's a feature that any nurse can write about their experiences, you would assume as a nurse. And here was Lamo sharing about her experience with postpartum depression. So for the courage to share as you were going through, and just endless thanks, Lamo.
So thank you, everyone, for having me here. Thank you, RNAO and Doris, for asking me. As you might have already guessed, I'm a nervous public speaker. But I'm going to speak. I don't have notes because, I'm not prepared for this audience. I would like to start by saying there's this Indian mythology tale where there were two gods who was tested by a teacher, said, just let us see who moves around the universe in the shortest time. And the elder brother started on his mission, while the younger one, just revolved around his mother and said, she's my universe. This is the essence of motherhood, and this is also influenced by the cultural background that I've been raised in. And so being a mother is a big pressure, especially if you are a mother of 4, because you're a pro-mom, especially if you are a nurse, you have a background, health background, and especially if you are a strong woman that is being seen by people or perceived by people. So when I was going through my 4th pregnancy, retrospectively, I did have the postpartum blues in my first one, but then it evolved. It's just for a short period of time, it goes away, and then you're doing your chores, it's the first one. The 4th one hit me a little harder. It's also, it's because of the additional responsibilities that you have, also that affects you, the lack of support, and the way you are perceived by people, because you want to be strong for your sisters, you want to be strong for your mother, and you don't have the courage to speak to your family. And then I was actually speaking, the credit goes to Daniel Punch from the communications team. We were at an RNAO event. RNAO event, it was like a getaway for me, away from my other kids. And so I was there, and I was speaking to Daniel, and he said, so how are you? So I spoke about what I felt, and maybe I should write something. And this new nursing station blog that has started, so that other people can also talk about it. He said, yeah, sure, and I'll edit it for you. And that's how we started. So I wrote like a brief, and Daniel said, well, the pressure's there because I'm leaving in a short time. So I said, okay, let's get this article out. And imagine the kind of conversation that started going around. People were like, oh, so you had that? Because those same people would say, oh, you're a pro, you don't need help. You'll be fine. You'll just get over it. And those were things that were really pressurizing me as to how I can be a better mom. I never spoke about this to my family. I never spoke about this to my mother, that I was like feeling what I'm feeling right now. Sorry about that. But yeah. So, and then, that set the whole conversation rolling, where people could come up and talk. And I thought, this is great, because we have to understand, Canada is culturally diverse. We have to understand the women who come from what backgrounds, like what is their cultural upbringing, what is the pressure that they have to face, what are the social supports that are there to help these kind of women. And women are more, are essential, because a loss of a mother is a loss of a family, a loss of a generation. So that was key to me, and then I had to talk. Just 2 days ago, before I was coming here, I had a friend call me. She said, can I talk to you? So I said, okay, I'm driving to Brampton, I'll come back and I'll talk to you. So I knew there was something. So she said, she's a new mom, her son is like 3 months. And she said, you know what, that article that you wrote, not that article, but just a blog that you wrote, I wanted to speak to you about that. I said, is everything okay? And she said, no, and she started weeping. And I think that was the outcome that I want. where people can come up and talk about this. You know, treatment is second phase. The diagnosis is important. Perinatal depression, postpartum depression is something that's diagnosed after it's established, not in the making. Because people always want to be strong. They want to just... So... I'm sorry. Thanks. Sorry, my son's 10 months old. Thanks. He's great. My kids are great. My husband's great. But not everyone has great social support. We need to reach out to them. Thank you.
So stay here. Come, Sue. Come, Katherine. So now you understand why we are issuing this guideline. And now you understand why, while all the guidelines are very important, this one in particular is important for women, for families, for the people that care for women, and let me say to you, also for men, because we haven't tackled that, but there is postpartum and prepartum depression. Come, darling. Come, if you want to come. They're all crying, my colleagues. You know, I think if I think back to my son is 43, if I now think back to that, I mean, I remember I was crying. No, I took it as natural, right? Who knows what I was going through? It went through faster, but who knows? No one even talked about those things. During your time, they kept it quiet still at home. During your time now, and I attribute that in part to the first guideline that we issued, and in part that women have been empowered to talk, and in part that we have normalized that this is something that happens, and in part to people like you that talk in the midst through it, we absolutely need to keep going. And we need to let the community know and health professionals to know, to the health professionals, that it's not acceptable not to ask. It's not acceptable not to do universal assessment, I would say, same as we do for other things. And then to all of us to support one another. Because not everybody, as you said, Lamo, not everybody is lucky to have the supports at home, right? So thank you, ladies, for sharing. And please know to all of you that this is not in every single pregnancy. So I don't want people to get afraid of becoming pregnant. And even when people go through it, if we put the right supports in place, right, then people can move through it supported, feeling loved, not feeling that they're failing anyone, and together. So thank you so much, and Katherine, to you and the co-chairs for the expertise and the panel. And thank you for coming, to all of you.
Could I just make one more comment?
Anything.
I just wanted to make one more comment because I've made an observation, and I don't know for the nurses in the room if anybody's ever noticed this before, but there's a Facebook group that I am a part of, and it's nothing to do with postpartum depression, but it's a community group where lots of women post their needs for healthcare. Postpartum depression comes up on there, and it scares me a little bit what I see, because the people that are responding to people's comments are not necessarily healthcare professionals, and some of the advice is okay, some of it's not so okay. So women are talking about it in other venues, maybe not face-to-face with people, but on Facebook they do talk about it. So it's just something to be aware of, and just to keep in mind as professionals that we need to just look to see where people are reaching out.
So what this brings to mind, and this is one for our implementation team, is probably the need, Katherine, to do several webinars that are open to the public to discuss the guideline and to discuss the supports that are there, and maybe even augmenting our own website, the guideline, with local supports of where to reach, at least in Ontario, so that we can support women in that way. Thanks for sharing that, Sue.
Just wanted to make a comment. I don't have the time frame quite correctly. About 5 to 8 years ago, there was a physician who jumped off the subway. Okay, she had postpartum depression. And then there was a woman in the United States who was charged for murdering her children, about 3 children. That woman had postpartum depression. And as a mental health nurse, I felt, and I was crying with Liam, I felt so sad for these women because I've seen it in clinical practice. They didn't get the treatment. They end up in a mental health institution. But some of the judges and the broader society don't understand it. So that poor woman who murdered her children, mothers don't normally, mothers are very caring. They're like young lioness. They protect their young. But when a woman murders her child, something is drastically wrong. And society is not even aware that this woman has had depression and developed psychosis to do such a terrible crime.
Thank you. So I don't know if anyone has questions that would like to ask, either from Katherine, from Lamon Sue, from Angela, our president, myself, or any of us. If anybody has questions, comments. And I would like everybody that had anything to do with this guideline to come here for a second. Glenys, come. And all the ones that had anything to do with this guideline, please come to be acknowledged, because you're doing something amazing for the people, for Ontarians. Thank you.